Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a literal millennia-old cold case. We're going to go step by step through our sources in a detailed documentary-style exploration to figure out exactly what happened to one of the ancient world's most legendary waterways. It is an absolutely fascinating intersection of ancient myth, modern science, and, believe it or not, satellites, all coming together to uncover the truth behind the lost river Saraswati.
All right, let's jump right in. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're cracking open a 4,000-year-old geological cold case. Seriously, I want you to put on your detective hats for this one, because we are going to investigate the massive mystery of a missing mega river. We're talking about a colossal body of water that nurtured one of the ancient world's absolute greatest civilizations, and then it just simply vanished from the face of the Earth. It's an incredible story full of ancient texts, satellite sleuthing, and literally planet-shifting catastrophes. So thousands of years ago, ancient Indian literature, specifically the Rig Veda, which is their oldest text, vividly described this mighty perennial river.
You know, to really grasp the sheer magnitude of what we lost, we kind of have to look back at how this river was actually remembered. Just listen to this lavish praise taken directly from the ancient Rig Veda. Ambitame, Naditame, Devitame. That translates roughly to the best of mothers, the best of rivers, the best of goddesses. For the ancient Vedic people, the Saraswati wasn't just some geographical feature on a map. It was an actual deity. It was the center of their entire world, described as this massive, roaring, snow-fed river flowing straight from the mountains all the way to the ocean.
I mean, this was a deeply holy river, with these great sages building their ashrams right along its banks. But here's the catch. Today, if you trace your finger across a map of northwest India and Pakistan, this massive, life-giving river is just gone, completely missing from the map.
Which brings us to part one, the mighty mythical river. To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this geographic mystery, we first need to look at the physical footprint described in these ancient texts and analyzed by modern geological committees.
According to expert interpretations of these texts and extensive research by groups like the 𝐏𝐑𝐎𝐿𝐿 Committee, we are absolutely not talking about some modest little stream here. This was a massive, fast-flowing river system. The legend suggests it originated way up at the 𝐏𝐻𝐿𝐿 Glacier in the Himalayas. And get this, it was estimated to be roughly 1,500 kilometers long, anywhere from 3 to 15 kilometers wide, and up to 5 meters deep. That is a flourishing basin that acted as the literal cradle for the Indus-Sarasvati civilization, one of humanity's earliest societies. It flowed powerfully all the way to the sea, until, seemingly, it just dried up in a desert around 2000 BCE.
Moving on to part two, clues in the sand. You see, the first major physical clues in our investigation actually don't come from water at all. They come from the completely bizarre placement of ancient ruins sitting out in the middle of a barren landscape.
When archaeologists started mapping the region, they hit upon this incredible anomaly. Thousands of Bronze Age Harappan sites are clustered and lined up perfectly along this completely dry, dusty path known as the Gaggar-Hakra riverbed. Now you gotta ask yourself, why on earth would an advanced ancient civilization, one that relied heavily on agriculture and trade, build a massive string of cities right in the middle of a dry desert? Well, the simple answer is, they didn't. When those cities were built, that dusty path was a roaring river.
And the scale of this is just staggering. We are talking about up to 2,600 discovered settlements. 2,600. They thrived for thousands of years in this exact alignment, and then they were abruptly abandoned around 3,500 years ago. This prompted scientists to ask the obvious question: what happened to their life source? Because let's be real, an entire civilization doesn't just pack up and abandon a 1,500-kilometer stretch of land unless their very means of survival just vanishes.
That takes us to part three, tracing channels from space. To solve a 4,000-year-old mystery buried deep under the sands of the Thar Desert, researchers realized pretty quickly that shovels weren't going to cut it. They needed a bigger perspective. So they turned to modern eyes in the sky. They began hunting for something called a paleochannel. If you're not familiar, a paleochannel is basically a remnant of an inactive river or stream channel that's been filled in or buried by younger sediment over time. By tracking down these features, scientists were hoping to find the fossilized fingerprint of the river, hidden right beneath the modern semi-arid landscape. And here's where it gets really cool. Using multispectral satellite imagery, like IRS and Landsat data, along with radar from space agencies, they basically gave the desert an X-ray. It's kind of like finding a 4,000-year-old water stand hidden under the cosmic carpet. They started detecting these dark serpentine signatures underground. Those darker tones? They indicate high subsurface moisture and vegetation that's actually still thriving on the rich residual loamy soil of that ancient riverbed. And these signatures appeared exactly where the lost river was suspected to be, giving us a virtual blueprint of the desert floor.
But, satellite data alone is really just a picture from space. To physically prove what the satellites were seeing, researchers at IIT Kanpur used a method called geoelectric resistivity. It's this brilliant geophysical technique used to map out subsurface architecture by measuring the electrical resistance of buried materials, like sand and clay. Essentially, it's an ingenious way to look deep underground without ever having to disturb the earth.
And the results were a massive breakthrough. When they ran these resistivity transects near major Harappan sites, places like Kalibangan and Kunal, the data revealed thick, extensive sand bodies buried beneath the surface. They were sitting right on top of dune sediments, directly adjacent to these ancient cities. These are the undeniable, large-scale geological deposits of a massive, long-lived ancient river system. The hard science on the ground had definitively matched the pictures from space.
All right, part 4, Tectonics and a Lost River. So the physical evidence absolutely confirms the river existed exactly where those ruins are, which naturally brings us to the cause of death investigation. I mean, how does a perennial river of this massive magnitude just disappear off the face of the Earth?
If we look at the timeline, from 6,000 to 4,000 BCE, we've got this mighty, perennial river flowing straight down from the Himalayas, nourishing a vast civilization. But then, between 5,000 and 3,000 BCE, major tectonic shifts began violently destabilizing the Siwalik domain in the Himalayan foothills. Fast forward to 2000 BCE, and we see a total dry-up of the river and the mass abandonment of those urban centers. The timeline paints a really clear picture of a gradual demise brought on by severe geological unrest. Let's break down that geological cascade step by step, because it's fascinating. First, those massive tectonic events physically severed the river's connection to the Himalayan glaciers, completely cutting off its primary source of meltwater. Second, because the land was literally uplifting, major tributaries like the Sutlej and Yamuna were diverted away into totally different river systems. Third, starved of its source, the main river was reduced to just these disconnected, monsoon-fed lakes and pools. Actually, some ancient texts famously refer to it in this exact state as the River of Pools. And finally, those remaining channels just dried up entirely and were buried beneath the expanding desert sands. The river was stranded, and unfortunately, so were the people. Which leads us to part 5, the Great Geography Debate. Now, while the remote sensing data and the geological drilling are crystal clear that a buried river absolutely exists there, the historical identification of these specific channels as the legendary Rigvedic Saraswati, well, that remains a subject of intense, ongoing scholarly debate. To be totally objective here, there are two main perspectives we need to look at impartially. On one side, you have the Gaggar-Hakra theory. This identifies the Saraswati with the dry river beds we've just been talking about in northwest India and Pakistan. It's heavily supported by late Rigvedic texts and that undeniable alignment of the 2600 Harappan sites. But on the other side, you have the Helmand theory. This argues that the Saraswati is actually the Helmand River in Afghanistan, which was known in ancient Avestan as Harappan. Proponents of this theory point out that the older texts describe a river cutting through deep mountains, which perfectly matches the Helmand's rugged geography, rather than the flat plains of the Gaggar-Hakra. So how do we resolve this contradiction? Well, there's a really compelling idea called the migration hypothesis. Think about it. Did migrating Vedic people use the exact same name for two completely different rivers at different points in their history? It's a super fascinating hypothesis that suggests both theories might actually be right. As these populations migrated from Afghanistan into the Indian subcontinent, it's very possible they just brought the sacred name of the river along with them, applying it to the new mighty river they eventually settled beside. Makes a lot of sense, right?
But for centuries, historians and scholars would look at the arid, super dry landscapes of modern northwest India and ask one really fundamental question. Did the world's holiest river actually exist? Or was it purely a legendary tale? Was it just a really powerful spiritual metaphor invented by ancient poets? Well, you can't exactly solve a cold case with poetry alone, right? We need hard evidence. Which brings us to a final question to wrap things up, and it's something I really want you to think about. If the immense, unyielding forces of nature can completely erase an 11-kilometer-wide mega river, literally the lifeblood of an entire ancient civilization, What does that mean for the rivers we depend on today? It's a pretty profound reminder. We obviously can't control plate tectonics, but we heavily influence our climate and exactly how we manage our water. The ancient cold case of the Saraswati isn't just history, guys. It's a stark warning about the true fragility of the natural resources we totally take for granted. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and keep asking the big questions.